Hey everyone, this is Vinton Bayne.
And I'm Robbie Hurlocker.
And before we get to our episode, we wanted to quickly touch on the Tony Awards that just happened.
Yeah, the Hamiltonies.
Hamiltonies.
Everything was super exciting.
Yes.
This was really fun. Hamilton had a world record of 16 Tony nominations this year going into the show.
Right.
So much fun.
Yeah. So we didn't get the world record of Tony's won. We actually only got 11 here. And let's say we. This is like a sports team, right? This is, I am part of Hamilton.
We are Hamilton.
We are Hamilton. So they got 11, which is nothing to cry about. It's amazing.
Oh, it absolutely is amazing. And the record is only 12.
Yeah, we one short of the record. The record was held by the producers from 2001. Another great one. But there was a lot of good things going in this year. So it's kind of surprising that they did so much. They cleaned up so well.
Yeah, and we couldn't have even expected too much more than that because we had a lot of actors against one another. So you had best performance of a featured actor in a musical. You have Daveed Diggs and Christopher Jackson and Jonathan Groff all against each other.
Three of them up against each other.
Only one of them can win. How do you pick? It's so hard. Congratulations to Daveed Diggs, by the way. You secured that. It was well earned. And then you also had the best performance of a leading actor in a musical with Leslie Odom Jr. as Aaron Burr up against Lin-Manuel Miranda as Hamilton.
Oh my gosh, if I can just talk just for a moment about when that award was won and just the way that Lin-Manuel Miranda, he didn't win, but if you watch his face when it happens, he gets so excited. His eyes get big. He gets up. He's applauding. There are tears. He's so excited that his friend won this award.
Yes, he's so pumped for this. It really emphasizes how much of a family they are, how much of a community they are. They love each other. They're enjoying each other. They're applauding each other on Broadway here. That's one of the best things about the Tonys, that you have a community of people who work together. Even if they're on different shows, they're in the same 8-block radius, so to speak, of just working really near each other. They all kind of know each other, and they're applauding each other. They're celebrating each other. And here you see Lin-Manuel applauding his friend, who is really singing his words too. So it's like a creation. I think that was a really good choice of that particular award because Lin-Manuel Miranda won so many other things, and this is so good, so exciting.
So he got out there at one point and he gave this, what did he call it? He called it a sonnet. A sonnet. And he said, I'm not going to freestyle. I'm too old for that at this point, but I got this sonnet. And he kind of gave it to his wife, dedicated it to his wife, but he was also talking on the events that happened that morning, the tragic shooting in Orlando, which was weighed heavy on these Tony Awards, but they were not afraid to bring it up. They're like, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about love. We're going to talk about diversity. We're going to make this a point of the show, even to the point where when they performed, they actually left their muskets behind. They were like, we're going to, as a sign of unity with them against this violence, we're going to not perform with muskets.
Yeah, I love that. Very respectful, an expression and a confession that hate will not win. Hate will not have the final word. We will make sure that love is the winner of the day.
Which is exactly what Lin-Manuel said in his sonnet. He
love is love is love is love is love.
Room to tears.
Oh my goodness.
I started weeping. And I've watched it 3 times since then just to show other people, and each time I can't help it. The tears start falling. Oh my gosh, Lin-Manuel Miranda is a beautiful man, and he can write so beautifully, even on the spur of the moment like that. I mean, he obviously had to have written that day. Right. But yeah, it was beautiful.
It was so beautiful. Yeah, we're talking about the awards they actually won and we're up for, but we could also talk a lot about just the transitions between the presentations and how the whole thing opened up with, first of all, James Corden, fantastic host.
I'm not that familiar with him. I've seen him in some smaller things here and there, but not that familiar. But he did a great job.
No, I love him so much. On I will watch every single carpool karaoke that he has. My sister Carrie actually got me onto watching those and watching his late night shows and all the things he's done. He's so funny. He's so clever. And his whole opening his opening routine where he did a reference to all of the major shows. He did Phantom. He did Rant. He did some really beautiful one-liners. It was just super. He's super talented. But then when they did the opening to the Tonys where they were singing towards James Corden and he played the role of Alexander Hamilton in the opening act where he's like, my name is James Corden.
That was so good. I'm so glad they did that.
Yeah, and at the end when the Hamilton actors started walking towards him, he looked at them and they said, we have so many Tonys to award, and then he looked at them and said, just you wait, guys, because they started walking towards the Tony that he was holding. He was like, just you wait for the moment where we're actually going to hand this award to you.
All the actors had to kind of back up like, okay, all right.
hands off for a moment.
It was just after that, or maybe just before that, he had said that the Tony Awards are basically the Oscars, but with diversity.
Yes.
And it was so true. There was so much diversity. It was so great to see that. You even had you had racial diversity. You had the deaf actress who was performing in that musical. It was beautiful. Like to hear her get up there and kind of tell her heart about what it is to be a deaf person involved in the musical community.
Yes.
I just can't even imagine.
Yeah. So last December, I got to see Spring Awakening on Broadway with that cast.
Amazing.
It changed my life. It is the most moving thing I've seen on a stage live in, well, maybe ever. Actually, yeah, ever, because you get to see people who are not usually allowed to be a part of a musical community who are deaf. And the whole story of Spring Awakening is that you have these characters who are actually deaf on stage, and they're in a musical, and they're the leads, and they have a shadow self who's standing just outside of the spotlight singing their inner monologue and singing their heart's message throughout this. And the whole musical is signed so that if you're a deaf person and you come to the show, you don't have to watch the translator on the side of the stage. You can actually watch the show, which means so much. It is so important to be able to immerse yourself in that medium in a new way that it brought me to tears multiple times watching it. And there are moments when you hear the deaf actors actually start shouting in their own voices, and it is gut-wrenching and it is emotional. Spring Awakening, the one moment of the night when I actually was not specifically moved by my excitement for Hamilton was when Spring Awakening didn't actually get the Best Director. I was like, man, I love Thomas Kail so much. He's brilliant. I love seeing him in everything he does. He did such a wonderful job with the direction of Hamilton, and he is doing a great job promoting everything like that. But I also wanted to see the direction of Spring Awakening get up there and take the stage and have some winning there. We talk about diversity. One of the moments in this show that was actually a little bit disappointing for some of us Hamilton fans when we were wanting Pip to win, Philippa Sue as Eliza Schuyler to win in this musical in the category of Best Performance by a Leading Actress in a Musical. She was up for it. She would have done a wonderful job at this. She deserved it. She's put in so much hard work. She's beautiful. She's lovely. She has so much talent. So much hard work went into this. But I can't really fault them for giving it to Cynthia Erivo in The Color Purple.
The Color Purple,
So even that, you see these people in that role. The Color Purple is such an important musical, guys, and it's such an important book. It's a very wonderful moment for Broadway to revive this show and have it back up there on the stage. If you were watching the Tonys, you got to see a performance from that musical. It's a very important thing. Diversity really was the name of the game last night, or when we were watching the Tonys ourselves.
Yeah, and I will say right now that there was a lot of tough competition this year. Every win that Hamilton got is a big deal, guys. There was tough competition. There's been years of the Tonys and other award shows where, there's not a lot of competition. One thing outshines everything and the other things, they're okay, But this year, there were so many good things going on. It's understandable that Hamilton didn't make that record. It's amazing that they got as many as they did. I'm so happy about it.
I love that. And I think that that's a wonderful point to make because things like Sarah Bareilles' Waitress, which I'm still waiting for my cast album that just was released recently to come in the mail. I'm still waiting for this. But her actual singles when she's singing from Waitress and the things I've been able to kind of grab about listening to this musical, oh my goodness.
Right.
It is so talented. She is so talented in the musical that she did there was great. The performance from that was wonderful. I will say that the play, The Humans, which won the best play, I feel like that was a little rigged because everyone that was up for an award was human. So, I mean, they didn't even have another, I'm just kidding. Yeah, one of my favorite personal moments was when I got to see the cast of Hamilton start singing a song from Rent, which is one of my top musicals from recent eras where I'm able to see this. I'm like, I kind of got a musical gasm. I don't know if I could say that, but it was just so much fun and excitement right up there when my favorite cast right now is doing one of my favorite songs. It's just, oh my goodness, so much excitement. The Tonys are my people, guys. This is our thing. If you haven't been able to watch this yet, pull up the YouTube videos, watch the performances.
These clips are online. You should really start looking up these clips because it was an amazing time.
There were a number of performances where you got to see the Battle of Yorktown, a couple lines from History Has Its Eyes on You with Chris Jackson doing the amazing Washington impression. He's so good.
Yes.
Oh man, so good. And then at the encore piece, after they announced that they won the best musical, they got to come out on the stage and they did the Schuyler Sisters, which was great.
Yeah, and when they first got up to do the performance, well, before they got up, I should say, the Obamas actually introduced them, and they reminisced kind of on when Lin-Manuel Miranda first came to the White House and introduced this musical to them and told them what he was going to be doing, and Obama himself was like, I'll admit, we kind of laughed about it, but who's laughing now?
Yes. So we're really excited about what just happened with the Tonys and with the Hamilton pride that was shown there and how much everyone in that cast was able to get the recognition that we think they deserve. We think that this was absolutely great and really exciting, really fun time. It was nice to see what all of you were tweeting on Twitter and joining in the conversations online. Right. It was really good. My phone died halfway through, and I actually had to start the Tonys a little bit later than everyone else. So I was trying to catch up by skipping through the commercials at a friend's house and trying to get to the point where everyone else was on Twitter. And so, but it was so much of a fun experience and a really good time.
And we'd love to just go down the line and read all the people that were nominated and congratulate them, and then all the people that won and congratulate them as well. But chances are you either watch the Tonys or you have access to look those lists up. We don't want to spend a lot of time on that when you want to get to your episode. So we're going to get to the episode here. But we have one quick announcement before we get to the episode.
Yes.
We got Hamilton tickets.
We got Hamilton tickets.
Yes. Yes. So we are going to be going to see Hamilton live and in person. And we're going to be touring some historical locations as well and doing some special podcasts about those locations. Take a little extra time while we're there. And so we'll have some special episodes, hopefully about just seeing the performance and then about the special locations that we go to.
Right. And so I really am, obviously, I'm super excited about this.
Yes.
We do have to give a special shout out because neither one of us would have been able to acquire these tickets on our own.
Right.
But one of our close, dear friends who is a podcaster on the Common Room Radio Network, who is with the Fathoms Deep Black Sails podcast.
Yes, check her out.
Daphne Olive is a great Hamilton fan, a great friend of ours. She is so sweet, so kind. She was able to secure a couple tickets for herself and her family, and then she said, hey, we got a couple extras. Vinton and Robbie, would you like to join us?
And we were like, yes.
Yeah,
please,
we will absolutely pay for
How? What? When? How? Give me.
What do we owe you?
Take my money.
Yes. And we are so pumped. We are so grateful. We are excited. I almost hesitated to say this on the podcast because so many people out there have not yet been able to see this. We know what that's like because we haven't yet been able to see this. Like it's something we've been missing out on as well. I really am excited for once this show starts touring, once everyone in the nation is able to see this a lot more closer to their home, once we hopefully get a cast recording of a film of what's actually happening on the stage that is out there and legal, of course, and is available to everyone to see what's happening on this beautiful stage that performs Hamilton.
Right. So those tickets are for March of next year, so it's going to be a little while. We're going to keep pushing out episodes until then, and then by March of next year, we'll have some really special episodes for you guys to listen to.
Oh, yeah. That's going to be a lot of fun. So stay tuned. I think it's about time for us to let everyone get to their episode.
Yeah. Enjoy your episode. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Hello and welcome to Hamilton the Podcast. I'm Vinton Bayne.
And I'm Robbie Hurlocker.
It must be nice to have Robbie Hurlocker on your side.
Aw, thanks, man. Oh, I appreciate you having my back, too.
So today we're discussing Washington on Your Side. And we're also going to be hitting one last time and at least a little bit of I Know Him.
Right. So this is going to be the downfall of the Washington administration, the falling apart of Washington's plan for a coalition government of different sides that are all together trying to build America's government. And you're going to see Jefferson leaving office. You're going to see Washington himself stepping down from office. And you're going to see the beginnings of President Adams stepping forward and seeing a new administration taking its place.
So starting off where we left off, you remember Jefferson said, "You're nothing without Washington behind you. Daddy's calling," which led straight into this song, "It Must Be Nice to Have Washington on Your Side."
Yeah, historically, if we were looking at this just from the notion of state representation in the government, Virginia had a pretty solid base of power because the main leader in the Congress was James Madison, a Virginian. The Secretary of State is a Virginian, Thomas Jefferson, and then a Virginian is sitting in the presidency in the White House. And so by all stretches of assumption, you should have Virginia as the biggest superpower in the 13 colonies here.
Right.
But here, Washington does not side with his fellow Virginians. He actually associates way more with Northern finance and commerce and even abolitionism, even though we can talk about how Washington wouldn't really free his slaves until in his will, he said they would be freed on Martha's death. And then because she was afraid of her slaves having a vested interest in her death, she was like, okay, I'm going to free them early. So they didn't get freed until after the fact. And he actually had some brutal treatment of slaves while he was a slaveholder. But all that to be placed aside, he did side with Northern causes, and it had major consequences in the way American politics worked, because he actually associated more with the North. And he told Edmund Randolph in a letter once that if the Union were to break up in between the North and the South, he had made up his mind to remove himself and be of the Northern. So Washington, this guy whose plantation at Mount Vernon is just like 15 miles from the Potomac, where the capital would eventually be, he actually associated more with the Northern Hamiltonian Federalist camp than with his fellow Virginians, which was such a sore point for the Democratic Republicans in the end of this.
Yeah, and it just seems so out of place. Like, most people side with where they're from and where their home is, and Washington was not like that.
Right. It's definitely a turning point in American history. I mean, even though it's the very beginning of the true American history, so to speak, as a country. But if Washington had kind of sided with the South, it probably would have brought on the Civil War, the American Civil War, 70 years earlier than it did, because he would have been able to overemphasize Southern power to the extent of a lot of people were in favor of breaking up the Union already. So Washington siding with the North probably actually balanced the scales a little bit to make it appropriate for how the beginning administration works. So all that to be said, in this song, we'll see Jefferson and Madison and Aaron Burr all looking at Washington saying, it would be nice to have that colossus figure in our camp.
Right.
We wish we had him here.
Yeah, you kind of have the idea that they're insulting Hamilton, like, you're nothing without Washington, kind of continuing that idea by saying it must be nice to have Washington on your side. But there's also this tone of jealousy of the founding father. It's almost like when a father picks a favorite son, and then the siblings are like, it must be nice, you have daddy on your side, he doesn't care about us, you get everything. Right. And so there's this jealousy there of the founding father choosing his favorite son and kind of pouring into him, and then the other people are just like, yeah, we're just left by the wayside.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that hint of like sibling rivalry here between these.
Exactly. So in the song, it starts off with Burr singing that part, it must be nice to have Washington on your side. And really, at the beginning here, but throughout the rest of the song, you're going to have Burr just kind of chiming in a little bit, and seems to be egging on Jefferson and Madison as they build on each other in their anger toward Hamilton and this idea. So they start to come to these conclusions, and it's kind of this idea of these people coming together and venting, but then building on each other and making it worse to where they're like, yeah, we have to do something. Right. You know, how a mob starts.
Anger begets more anger, and it turns into violence and actual actions taking place.
Yeah. Speaking of actions, Jefferson jumps right in, and in this song, Jefferson has some amazing rhymes. I'm just going to say it now. We're going to be singing that throughout the rest of the song, but yeah, so good.
Oh my goodness. This song, just poetically, I love analyzing poetry, probably more than I should, because poetry should just be enjoyed sometimes, but every now and then I want to just sit down with poetry and analyze, okay, these are all of the points of alliteration, these are all the points of assonance, these are all the points of internal rhymes, these are all the points of different types of things that you have analyzing the meter and the time, and it's so much fun for me to analyze it. And this song, of all the songs in the musical, has the most technical poetry inside of it. It's so technically rich, and it's so powerful.
And just one final overall note, you're going to see Jefferson coming in here, and when he starts off, he's rapping a little slower about Hamilton's policies, and then he's going to start getting personal, and he's going to speed up, and the intensity is going to increase, and then Madison's going to join in, and the intensity and the speed is going to increase again, and it just, like I said earlier, they're just pushing each other further and further, and it's getting more intense until it kind of culminates at the end of the song.
Yeah, it's almost like a snowball going down the hill, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I do appreciate, like you said, that Burr is one of the people instigating that. Like, he is kind of saying, hey, if you don't actually get on this side, like, Hamilton is such a force, we need to make sure we're involved in stopping him. And really, one of the things that's worth noting is that Jefferson and Madison were obviously opponents of Hamilton because of their own ideologies. Burr was a New York opponent to Hamilton. Yes. And so Burr and Hamilton, just talking politics, before the personal arguments even come into place, they had some individual political rivalries to begin with. And as Burr is someone who could eventually start courting the Federalists because he was kind of a moderate who could win votes from both sides, Hamilton really saw him as someone that could steal his place in New York politics. And so they were New Yorkers against each other at a lot of points. And here, it's almost like, well, you definitely see the alliance between a New York Republican and Aaron Burr and the Southern Republicans in Jefferson and Madison.
Right. So Jefferson comes in with these science rhymes.
Yeah, Newton's.
He's very much showing his love for science throughout this song. And he starts off with Newton's third law of motion, which Isaac Newton was one of the fathers of the Age of Enlightenment. So it's very much so someone that Jefferson looks up to and wants to quote.
Oh, yeah. He loves his books. He loves analyzing everything that's happening in the Enlightenment, the European Enlightenment, the American side of things. He loves that.
And he says, we smack each other in the press and we don't print retractions, which is true. About halfway through Washington's presidency, there were fiercely partisan newspapers existing, including the New York Post, which Hamilton founded, pushing his side of the agenda.
Yeah, and to kind of counteract the press that the Federalists had, you had Freneau, who was in charge of the National Gazette for the Republican side, and Freneau was actually a employee of Thomas Jefferson in the State Department. So in order to back Freneau's writings in the Republican press that was smacking the Washington administration left and right, Jefferson was actually hiring this guy and paying this guy and basically being the patron of the National Gazette that was smacking the Washington administration left and right. And that was kind of a point of contention where Washington, once he finally realized this and started believing this, he asked for Jefferson to fire Freneau from his staff at the State Department. And there was a big back and forth, and Jefferson basically didn't want to let go of this guy who was advancing the Republican platform in the press, even though it was so hotly contested. Most of the articles that they wrote against each other, they grabbed like Latin names for each other and wrote under pseudonyms. So when Hamilton in the next song is going to talk to Washington, he says, I'll write under a pseudonym. You can see what I can do to him, because they're used to doing that. They write under Latin names. It's very clear who is actually writing. No one was confused.
Who else is coming up against Jefferson with these type of arguments?
Right.
Hamilton.
With inside information. Yeah. So that was a big point of contention. They're fighting against each other in the press, and you do see that every time that they make a accusation against the other side has to come in and make their opposite claim. So there's this fracturing. There is this, every action has the equal opposite reaction, because they are, by their own stances, defining the stances of the other, because they are going to push each other closer to their extremes, essentially creating the division that becomes political parties in America.
Yeah. Jefferson says, I get no satisfaction. And there's more of that satisfied theme that goes throughout this musical, along with the idea of a dual satisfaction there, because he's going to say a little bit later in the song, I'll pull the trigger on him, someone load the gun and cock it. And it seems to be that threatening connection to a duel, like he's making a threat there, a veiled threat.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of veiled and less veiled threats inside of this song, and you see that cementing of Jefferson kind of taking a stand even further against Hamilton and the Federalists.
And then there's that really fun line where he says, fits of passion, and then in the next line, pits of fashion.
Right. I think it's our friend Emily who pointed that out on Twitter, that she really, like, that's one of her favorite lines in this. Yeah, it's Spoonerism, where you switch the first syllable or first letter of certain words with the next one. So you have fits of passion, pits of fashion. It took me a little bit when I was listening through this, because there are so many other beautiful lyrical things in this that actually took me a few listens to before I actually highlighted that Spoonerism, and I was like, oh, that's beautiful too. I love that. I hadn't caught it, because you have to sit down sometimes with, I sometimes have to sit down with the words in front of me to see some of those things.
Yeah, and so that second full line there is the way he primps and preens and dresses like the pits of fashion. That kind of brings up that idea that we mentioned in Cabinet Battle number 2, where Jefferson says, smells like new money, dresses like fake royalty. And Lin-Manuel Miranda actually discussed how Hamilton was mocked because he was overdressed like crazy. Quote, it's new money. Very Kanye.
Oh my goodness. So Kanye. I always wondered what Jefferson was actually trying to say here, where it's the pits of fashion. Because pits, I'm like, that's the low side of things. Like, you're not really that fashionable if you're the pits of fashion. But he's primping and preeming and acting like it, so it's like, maybe that's the fake royalty part.
Right.
Like, he's not really accomplishing this. He's not really the status that he's trying to present to everyone else. He's just a fake. He's a poser.
Yeah, I kind of read when I was researching that Lin-Manuel Miranda kind of made that phrase up. It's not a real phrase that means much of anything.
Right.
But he wanted to have that fun Spoonerism in there, so he made a phrase up that you can kind of assume what it means.
Yeah, exactly. You get his tone very easily. He's very much attacking Hamilton in just every way he can, politically, economically, and personally, and fashionably.
Right. So our poorest citizens, our farmers, live ration to ration as Wall Street robs them blind in search of chips to cash in.
Yeah, Jefferson is talking about his populist position here, where he wants to support the poorer farmers. He wants to support the people and the agricultural industry in America. And he thinks that all of these big bankers in New York are really out to get you. All of the corporate greed is going to take over if we follow Hamilton's capitalistic plan and Hamilton's economic ideals for the banking system and for finances and for foreign debt. And he was looking at this as the creation of Wall Street versus Main Street.
Exactly, yeah. I think we've mentioned it before, but Hamilton's financial schemes did pave the way for Wall Street's first speculators and for the birth of the stock exchange.
And there's that poker reference again with in search of chips to cash in, where it's like you're playing with someone else's money and you're taking risks and you're basically gambling with someone else's money, and you shouldn't reward that type of speculation. Jefferson consistently opposes people who will make a profit off of anything that kind of takes advantage of farmers or people in the poorer echelons of American society at that time.
Right.
Of course, that doesn't extend to all people at that time, because we've talked about Jefferson's slaveholding tendencies and all of that, and how he was very hypocritical in those areas. So he was all for liberty and freedom and advancement of poor farmers, but not necessarily advancement of poor slaves and the rights that they had. So yeah, we can talk all day about that. But here you see that he is very much against Wall Street, very much in favor of the farmers and their rights.
And he says, somebody give me some dirt on this vacuous mass so we can at last unmask him. And in history, Reynolds himself would be the one giving the dirt. But in general, Jefferson did tend to let others do his dirty work. And we mentioned that before. Robbie brought that up a second ago. But he also, at a different point, hired a man named James T. Callender to attack John Adams. And that was another famous point where Jefferson hires people to attack others, so he's not the one actually doing the dirty work and doing that.
Yeah, that's a very conniving side of Thomas Jefferson's history. He often would be the organizer who would motivate people to do that thing against his enemies. And he'd kind of be that rallying point behind whom the Republicans would get to kind of say, he's our champion, he's our leader, but he would kind of just get the rest of the Republicans to do the work a lot of the times. Right. Now, he did certain things. We're not saying he was lazy completely across the board, but he did often hand things over to other people, try to get Madison to write letters, try to get Freneau to be involved in publishing stuff, try to get others involved in actually loading the gun. He just wanted to take the credit for it.
Exactly. And I like that vacuous mass, that more of Jefferson's science talk there, even though it is a bit of an oxymoron, a vacuous mass.
That's
vacuous
true.
Would say it's empty, mass would say it's not.
I hadn't thought of that, actually. I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah, he's more using vacuous as unintelligent. So then there's the dual kind of metaphor there at the end, like I said earlier, and it goes right into Jefferson and Burr joining in together. You see that they're on the same page now and they're singing this song together. It must be nice to have Washington on your side. They have a mutual enemy here. They're joining forces.
Yeah, so just like at the beginning of this musical, you saw how the trio joins Hamilton, and you have Hercules Mulligan, Marquis de Lafayette, and John Lawrence joining him, saying, tomorrow there will be more of us. Let's rally the troops. Let's get everyone together to rise up against our common enemy, the British Empire that is oppressing us. Here you see that Burr is actually the one instigating those types of connections and rallying points, and he's saying, hey, Jefferson, get on board with me. Madison is going to be the next one to come into this song, and they're going to say, hey, Madison, get on board with us. Let's oppose Hamilton together. They're forming their coalition officially against Hamilton, and in this song, you see that cementing that we've already talked about, where this is going to be the unity of the Democratic Republican Party, where you see that they are actually now forming these connections, rallying together, pumping each other up, forming a coalition against the Hamiltonian Federalists.
Yeah, and so to bring Madison in, they say here, look back at the Bill of Rights. And I think that they're talking about the 10th Amendment there. And when Washington asked Jefferson to give his opinion on the constitutionality of the national bank, his response was, I consider the foundation of the Constitution as laid on this ground, that all powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people. To take a single step beyond the boundaries thus specifically drawn around the powers of Congress is to take possession of a boundless field of power, no longer susceptible of any definition. And he quoted the 10th Amendment there, basically, that says the federal government cannot do anything that the Constitution does not exactly give it power to do.
Right. And so the Bill of Rights is collectively the name of the first 10 amendments together.
Right.
And so these are the amendments to the Constitution that in some states helped to get the Constitution passed in a lot of areas. And Madison kind of authored these things, and they're supposed to guarantee human rights apart from the government. And so
exactly,
like you have in the First Amendment, even the key thing that we often go back to as Americans, saying this is our foundation for freedom of religion, freedom of the press, which is very important in this song and in history, where the press is what you use to communicate your freedom of speech. It's how you assemble. They're about to assemble their whole party together, and you see that they're kind of celebrating their rights as citizens, and there's almost this implication that the Bill of Rights is being challenged by these power-grabbing federalists that want to increase the size of the federal government. And Madison's comment in here is basically responding to how together they've all sung that the Bill of Rights, the ink hasn't really dried on it. It's still like a fresh document that hasn't fully worked out and fully been defended entirely. But Madison looks at it and he says, so Hamilton has doubled the size of the government. And he raises the question, wasn't the trouble with much of our previous government size? So the expanse of the British Empire was so big that they tried to do everything. They tried to tax everything. They tried to reach into all of the aspects of American colonists' lives, and that was a problem to Madison, and that's why the Bill of Rights was kind of drafted here to say you can't increase the government that much to stretch into the lives of personal citizens, and that's why Madison's getting on board here. He's saying that the Bill of Rights is in jeopardy if we have the power-grabbing Federalists do what they want to do.
Yeah, and we've mentioned it before, but it might be worth noting one more time here that this whole section, it makes Jefferson kind of a hypocrite later on when he does the Louisiana Purchase and himself goes against all these things he's saying.
Yeah, you know that, you have two future presidents here from the Republican Party there, at that point, Republican Party, not the current Republican Party at all. You have Jefferson and Madison together, who are basically going to be the third and fourth presidents of the United States, respectively. And together, once they become the executive, they understand a couple different things. Jefferson came to understand that the president was, in his opinion, very much kind of the pawn of the parties, like drafted by that. So early on, while he's in the Washington administration, he thinks that Washington is actively working against him. When he becomes president, he's like, oh, you know what? My hands are actually tied by the parties that we've created. And so he helps instigate the thing that traps himself in his own executive position. But he does expand the powers of the executive a lot more than Washington did, a lot more than Adams certainly did. Yeah. And then Madison comes in and he's kind of the follow-up to Jefferson and does a lot with the executive power as well. I like how Burr comes in here and he makes the attacks a little more personal here. He's like, right. Look in his eyes.
Yeah.
You can see how, like, in his eyes, he's certainly lying to you. Right. Jefferson follows up on that with that line.
Yeah, earlier in the musical, you had the Schuyler sisters talk about his eyes in a positive way, but Burr sees something negative in his eyes.
That's good. Yeah. Angelica talks about his intelligent eyes all the time.
Yeah.
And Jefferson doesn't believe that intelligence is there. He believes that it's all full of
It might be intelligent, but it's intelligent in a malevolent way.
Right, that's a good point.
So yeah, he says, see how he lies, follow the scent of his enterprise. And then they're going to bring up the first cabinet battle there, centralizing national credit and making American credit competitive. And they're saying, we got to start researching this guy. We got to dig in. We got to basically let the hounds loose and find what's wrong with this guy, find where he's doing wrongdoings. They're going to say later, follow the money and see where it goes, which is actually a line from the film All the President's Men, which is about the Watergate scandal. So it's kind of tying that in to Nixon and his misuse of money. So it's giving that reference of political figures misusing money, letting you know that they're thinking that Hamilton here has misused money somehow and is speculating or doing illegal things with the government's money.
Yeah, this immigrant embezzling government funds or something like that. And I like how Madison is the one here who brings up the line with follow the scent of his enterprise, because he's the representative in Congress, and Congress is the one that gets to investigate the Treasury Department.
Yeah.
They start an investigation. The Republicans in Congress are basically trying to see where are the holes in Hamilton's system. Was he embezzling government funds? Was he speculating with government funds? Was he paying off James Reynolds with government funds? And so you see the Congress investigation as it goes through history, that they kind of are trying to piece together what they can do to attack Hamilton's plan. And so Hamilton's going to eventually write that report that goes through every little piece of his own administration, his own Treasury Department. And eventually Congress will actually close the investigation when they can't find anything. And random little fact, Hamilton actually insists that they bring the investigation back up because he wants to vindicate himself before he leaves the Treasury office.
He's like, I'm clean. Keep investigating. Go deeper.
He says, like, you can't find any dirt on me. I have been above reproach politically speaking. I haven't done anything with American money that was questionable, and so he wants to be vindicated, and so he actually goes back to Congress in kind of an unprecedented, unorthodox move. He asks Congress to reopen their investigation of his department, and it's a really interesting thing. That doesn't actually happen historically until after Jefferson kind of leaves the office, leaves the State Department, and then Hamilton stays on a little bit to try to get himself vindicated in his Treasury Department before he leaves Washington's cabinet, but we'll talk about that as we get into one last time in the next song.
And so Jefferson briefly mentions, I have to resign, almost like he's just come up with that idea, and we're going to dig into that here in a second. But it goes on, and Madison says, somebody has to stand up for the South. And Burr just says, somebody has to stand up to his mouth. Because, well, other people have these ideologies against Hamilton. Burr really just wants him to shut up. Burr doesn't take a stand on things, but Burr just doesn't like Hamilton. He doesn't like that he's talking so much. He doesn't like that he's succeeding so much. And he's like, just shut him up.
Yeah, I like that there are three very different motives that unite these three allies together. Yeah. So Jefferson is that, we can question all day whether this is true or not, but he sees himself as needing to uphold his own political integrity and his intellectual integrity, saying, I can't be a part of this action that is taking place in the Washington administration. I can't be a part of this government. I have to get out of it. And so he kind of just steps down because of intellectual integrity reasons. Madison joins this because he's fighting for the South. One of his first lines in this musical is, I've been fighting for the South alone. I need Jefferson to help me out. And so Burr, his motivation is not the intellectual integrity. It's not fighting for the South and the people there. It's much more of a personal attack, and he's recognizing this vendetta that Hamilton has against him. He's looking back, and later he'll eventually say, I've analyzed all of the points in my life where it's crossed over with Hamilton, and Hamilton has been the common thread of disrespect in Burr's life. So it's a personal attack for him. And so they're all together. They're looking at how this entire house is in trouble. The entire government is being hijacked by these big business, big government federalists. And they say, if there's a fire you're trying to douse, you can't put it out from inside the house. Kind of that reference to the House of Representatives, but also like you can't be a part of the house in general, house fire metaphor.
And this might be a bit of a stretch, but when he says, if there's a fire you're trying to douse, it reminds me of My Shot when Hamilton says, the plan is to fan the spark into a flame. And Hamilton is now that flame. He's that fire, and he's consuming things, and people aren't appreciating it, especially his enemies specifically are not appreciating it. Jefferson's like, we got to put this fire out.
That's a really good connection. I like that a lot. The next stanza from Jefferson, in my opinion, and as someone who's gone through and has tried to rap every single song in this musical, this is actually one of the biggest tongue twisters in the entire musical. It's easier for me personally to rap all of Guns and Ships at a super fast pace with, I'm taking this horse by the reins, making red coats redder with bloodstains, and I'm never going to stop until I make a drop of burn of out of the remains. But then this line comes in, and you have so much poetry happening on top of poetry. You have the alliteration with the repeated consonant sounds with disciplined, dissonance, difference. But then you also have the assonance inside of it with the is sound with Washington isn't gonna listen to discipline, dissonance. And so you have the vowel sounds repeated and the rhymes in the middle of this. And you have the 3-syllable feet with the cabinet, plicit in, kissing it, and it just goes throughout that to where it makes it really difficult to rap really fast when you have the, I'm in the cabinet, I'm complicit in watching him grabbing at power and kissing it, Washington isn't going to listen to discipline, dissonance, this is the difference, this kid is out, and there are a lot of clipped words in that. This immigrant isn't somebody we chose. It's so hard not to just go into it, because it's such a fun song.
It's so powerful, too. Like, you can tell he just drops the mic when they come in with that, it's like, this is the climax of this song. Here it is. It's so good.
Yeah, it's hard to just talk about this song because it is such a pump you up, energize you, get the steam engine rolling, get everyone on board against Hamilton, because this is where we want to take this. We are rallying together. We are going to show those Federalists what they're up against. We are going to show them how strong the Southern Democratic Republicans are.
Yeah, Miranda specifically said that I give Diggs the insanely hard raps that I can't even deliver, and he does them like they're nothing. I keep giving him harder things to do, and he keeps knocking them out of the park. I can tell you one of the last things I wrote for this incarnation of Hamilton was the scene where Jefferson realizes he has to resign. I am in the cabinet. I am complicit. He has this crazy rhyme, and I wrote it because I knew I had David.
That's awesome.
In this, you're seeing that Jefferson realizes that if he wants to make a change here, he'll need to step down from his cabinet position, as he's going to in the next song.
So yeah, this is Jefferson's realization that he has to leave the cabinet, and he decides to springboard an investigation against Hamilton, and then he leaves the cabinet.
Right. So, like we said, this immigrant isn't somebody we chose. Hamilton wasn't elected. He was appointed by George Washington, and Burr refers to Hamilton as an immigrant throughout the show. And when they're at odds with him here, Madison, Jefferson, and Burr together reduce Hamilton to just an immigrant, despite all of his accomplishments. They just call him, oh, he's just an immigrant.
Yeah, it's like they want to remind people that he's not the true American. He's that outsider that came in and is trying to hijack our country, even though Hamilton has very much embodied the American experience.
Yeah.
He's embodied this American dream. He is a true American by his own admission, by his own desires, by his own example in a lot of ways. He is an American, but they want to remind people that he's an outsider so that they might start fearing him the way that they fear him.
Which I think they forgot. Immigrants, they get the job done.
Yeah.
When they say that, Southern, mother-loving, Democratic Republicans, the Southern part only is Jefferson and Madison, of course, because Burr's a Northerner, so he just waits until the Democratic Republicans part, and then he jumps in and joins them.
I like that a lot. When I listened to this song on the NPR First Listen, before the cast album was actually publicly released, they had this edited out, obviously, and I remember thinking, man, that is a long pause in there. Southern Democratic Republicans, where you have that long pause in the middle of the actual thoughts. And I was like, that just seems weird. I wonder what's going on there. But,
yeah, I didn't think about that.
But I actually learned the song that way because I listened to the First Listen so many times in that first week or two that it was out. And I was just like, man, that's how I learned it. And so when the cast album came out and I got my pre-ordered copy in the mail, it was kind of a realization and a check. I was like, oh my goodness, they say a word in there that I can't say.
And while they're doing this in the choreography, Jefferson, Madison, and Burr all do a dance move that's known as the A-Town Stomp, which is a popular dance move for Southern rappers, actually, specifically from Atlanta. And that accentuates the Southern identity of this political party here.
Yeah, I like those Southern ties.
And we've mentioned this before, but the term Democratic Republicans is an anachronism here. It's how we refer to them now looking back, and historians have come up with that term to kind of make it easier to differentiate parties. But back then they were just known as simply Republicans.
Yeah, the phrase Democratic actually, it wasn't a bad phrase most of the time, but it did have eventually some derogatory comments attached to it, where they saw the Democrats as the rabble-rousers who are trying to just uproot the order of things. And so they saw that as, they actually used it as an attack against their enemies at times. So yeah, they often just called themselves Republicans, people who are trying to stand up for a true republic.
Right. And they say here, every second the Treasury grows. And as Chernow says, quote, from modest origins, the Treasury office proliferated until they occupied the entire block. By the standards of the day, this represented a prodigious bureaucracy. For its critics, it was a monster in the making, inciting fears that the department would become the Treasury Secretary's personal spy force and military machine, swollen by the customs services. The Treasury Department payroll ballooned to more than 500 employees under Hamilton, while Henry Knox had a mere dozen civilian employees in the War Department, and Jefferson a paltry 6 at state, along with 2 charge d'affaires in Europe. Inevitably, the man heading a bureaucracy many times larger than the rest of the government combined would arouse opposition no matter how prudent his style, unquote.
Right. So that is so much power in the hands of Hamilton.
500 compared to the next step, dozen.
and then 6 to 8 in the State Department there. And that is huge. It's weird looking at this with a contemporary mind of seeing that the War Department was so tiny because we didn't have a standing army during the Washington administration. We had the idea of being able to raise militias and eventually kind of raise forces whenever you need to, but it would be the Adams administration before you kind of see that actual creation of the army, I think, where you would have some of that come into play. And you see that the War Department and the State Department were not as big and just didn't have the same resources that Hamilton had. It was like a Hamilton army. And historically, that is one of the reasons that Jefferson cited as him wanting to leave Washington's cabinet. So when Jefferson told Washington that he wanted to step down, first, Washington visited Monticello, said, hey, Jefferson, come on board. Don't leave my administration. I really need you to help cement the Federation together, to make sure the Union of the States stays together. The South and the North are united in these United States. So he asked Jefferson in a personal visit to his plantation, which he never actually visited the Grange where Hamilton lived. It was kind of a weird little point there, but he actually went to Monticello to ask Jefferson, please don't step down. And Jefferson agreed to 1 more year in office, and then eventually stepped down, at which point Washington again said, please don't step down. I need you to cement my coalition style of government. I need you to kind of keep us all together. He was afraid that losing Jefferson in the administration might actually accelerate the idea of a civil war between the North and the South. He thought that that might be a really sore point that would be hard to come back from. And so he was trying really hard to keep Jefferson on board. And so the second time when Washington was receiving Jefferson's resignation, he kind of made it clear that he wouldn't just accept his resignation and his retirement because of symptoms of dissatisfaction. You can't just leave my office, leave the administration because you aren't satisfied with something. That's just lazy. It's weird. He originally would not accept his resignation at first. And then Jefferson was really bold with Washington just up front and said there was a single source of that discontent, and it was the Treasury Department. And the specific complaint was, quote, that a system had there been contrived for deluging the states with paper money instead of gold and silver, for withdrawing our citizens from the pursuits of commerce, manufacturers, buildings, and other branches of useful industry to occupy themselves and their capitals in a species of gambling. So he's talking about that, like speculation, the gambling with government funds and all of that. And he talks about how Hamilton in the Treasury Department has become this power-hungry force that is unwilling to work with the people and their rights. And so Jefferson eventually steps down. Washington accepts that he can't keep Jefferson on anymore. He hadn't really fathomed the depth of the animosity between two of his most powerful and most talented lieutenants. And so he really starts to understand at this point, oh, they really do hate each other. They really can't work together. And when Washington finally accepts Jefferson's resignation, he sends him a letter that says that the opinion which I formed of your integrity and talents, and which dictated your original nomination, has been confirmed by the fullest experience, and that both have been eminently displayed in your discharge of your duty. So basically, President Washington was looking at Secretary Jefferson saying, I'm happy with what you've done. I don't always agree with you, but my opinion of your character, my opinion of your talents, and my opinion of your integrity is actually intact as you leave office. Washington, while Jefferson was in office, never seemed to believe the attacks that Jefferson was behind all of the Washington hate, all of the attack of the Washington administration. He never believed that someone so close to him would have that depth of treachery, so to speak, or that level of involvement in the anti-Hamilton, anti-Federalist cause. And so it took a while before Washington was fully convinced of Jefferson's kind of betrayal. And so Washington's kind of the guy who frequently in history has a close lieutenant who kind of stabs him in the back, with Benedict Arnold and then Thomas Jefferson here leading a lot of the causes against the Federalists and against the Washington administration and the Hamiltonian camp. And it really is a little bit sad to think of this from Washington's point of view, where he's trusted this guy for so long, this guy who has printed and who has hired Freneau and has advanced the Republican journals that were attacking his administration, and all the while Washington trusts him with valuable information that is kind of used to attack the Federalists on their side of things.
And this song ends referencing the emperor with no clothes. Jefferson says the emperor has no clothes. And it's kind of the idea of they're the only ones that see the truth in the government here, and that they're the only ones that are calling for something to happen. And then they all together say, we won't be invisible, much like the clothes in the story.
Right.
We won't be denied. And still, it must be nice to have Washington on your side, that there's that jealousy again at the end even.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought through it all, but I appreciate that reference to the old parable of the emperor having no clothes. Like you're telling the emperor that the most costly clothes you could ever wear, the most important things you could ever put on, the things that will show how important you are these invisible clothes that the seamstress put together and the tailor put together that are like it's just his birthday suit. And he goes out there, the king is walking in front of his people, totally exposed, totally looking like a fool, but he thinks that he is important. He thinks that he is in charge. He thinks that what he's wearing is this powerful robe of an emperor, that only important people can really see what's happening here. And so he's looking at this as like the wool being pulled over Washington's eyes, the wool being pulled over the American people's eyes, to where they're trying to say, we see through Hamilton's plans. We see through what he's trying to do. He's really trying to hurt America, and he's just selling us lies. He's selling us speculation. He's selling us all of these bad things that don't really work. So let's let him know that we see through it all. So we see Jefferson. He's leaving the cabinet, and he is kind of going home to Monticello, and he's going to chill for a few years.
Yeah, and I like that there's that depth to that line, because originally in the off-Broadway version, it just said, it's nice to have something to really oppose.
Oh, okay.
And so they changed it, and they added a bit more depth to it when they became on Broadway there.
Yeah, that allusion's really, really helpful. I like that.
So that takes us right into our next song, One Last Time. And in this song, we're going to see Hamilton writing George Washington's farewell address with him.
Yeah, it's worth noting that historically there's a little bit of a gap here where Washington's first term in office, Jefferson and Hamilton are both serving as Secretaries of State, and they stay on for quite a while, longer than both of them anticipated originally staying on. And Jefferson leaves office. Hamilton eventually leaves office as well, while Washington is still in the presidency. And so Hamilton goes home to try to work in his law practice after he's affirmed in that congressional investigation into the Treasury Department. He steps down, pursues law in New York, and leaves Philadelphia, the capital, which, by the way, we never really mentioned in our episode about the capital moving, that Philadelphia was the one that kind of lost out at that time because the capital was left Philadelphia. So shout out to all of you Philadelphia people that lost the capital. We understand your loss and we grieve for it, but Washington, D.C. is still kind of cool. So you see that there's that gap where Washington had new Secretary of Treasury and Secretaries of State, where he had a new administration come in, and a lot of them were loyal to Hamilton throughout it all. So even though Hamilton was up in New York State and he was analyzing law and debating in the courts, he was also involved in giving the new secretaries advice on every little detail of policies that went through. And I hope that after the musical's kind of done, we can do an episode on the What Comes Next, because at this portion in the musical, and at this portion in history, the John Jay Treaty, the Jay Treaty with Great Britain is kind of finalized. And remember, Hamilton's been working this whole time to increase the relationship financially and economically between America and Great Britain. And the Jay Treaty helps to do that in very controversial, debatable ways. And so Jefferson is hating that treaty. He writes against it a lot of the times. The Republicans are so opposed to it. And Hamilton writes papers during this middle period where he leaves the Treasury Department. He's working as a lawyer. He actually starts writing papers to defend the Jay Treaty. And he's working with Washington, even though he's not in office anymore, to try to pass that. And so that's one of the things that happens. Here in the musical, though, Hamilton actually is still in office trying to pursue this. So you're continuing that theme of ambition, that theme that he won't let go of power. He wants the power, and Washington is the one stepping down, and Hamilton does not understand. Yeah,
in the musical, they give an actual really close timeline to Jefferson resigning and Washington deciding not to run again. Thomas Jefferson resigned this morning, he's going to say, but it's actually a 2 to 3 year gap between Jefferson resigning to Washington deciding not to run again.
Yeah, Jefferson really doesn't resign specifically so that he can go run for president like the song hints. He resigns maybe with the thought of running for president later, but he doesn't actually express that because he's trying to keep his thoughts private a little more. And he goes home to spend time with his books, he spends time with his family, and spends time on his farm, and he starts rebuilding Monticello to fit these new models that he's drafted at this time. And so he really does spend the next few years as a bit of an outsider in politics. He's still the one that the Republicans use as their rallying force, saying that we expect him to be in charge. But when his name is put forward for the presidency later, and he becomes the vice president under John Adams, he doesn't actually express that he's interested in running for president. He doesn't run for president. He doesn't even acknowledge that he's going to accept the presidency if it's thrust upon him. He just doesn't put himself in a position where he opposes it. He never says that he wouldn't become president. He just says, you know what, if they want to put me forward, I'm not going to stop them, but I'm not specifically seeking the presidency. So he has that like kind of craftiness again underneath his schemes. And so in this musical, he specifically steps down so that he can run for president.
Right. So the song starts off with, Mr. President, you asked to see me, which is hearkening straight back to Right-Hand Man when he comes in and says, Your Excellency, you wanted to see me.
Yeah, so you see that relationship where General Washington and President Washington are calling in the right-hand man to give him the next marching orders and the steps that he needs to take.
Yeah, and then this might be a stretch, but Washington says, I know you're busy. That has a connection there to me, to Angelica and Take a Break, saying, I know you're very busy, except, Hamilton gives Washington his full attention.
Yeah, I don't feel like it's too much of a stretch because he says, like, I know you're busy, and then this whole song is about how he's getting ready to take a break. He's ready to step down and leave office. So there's definitely some connections to be made here. I think one of the interesting thoughts is that with as many as 500 plus employees and all of the congressional attacks and all of the things happening under Hamilton's office, Hamilton might have had a little more to do on a daily basis than Washington himself. He had that like busyness that Hamilton was always running, always doing things. And by the time the president was ready to step down, he was actually complaining about poor health. He had a lot of things that he just could not accomplish, that he felt like it was time for him to leave. He would often complain about his own memory lapses, poor vision, like his growing deafness and how hard it was for him to hear. And Ron Chernow in the Washington biography points out that all of those things he complained about were socially confining conditions, that if you can't remember things, you're kind of a weird person at a dinner party, or if you have poor vision, you can't see things well. If you can't hear as well, you have to keep asking, what happened? What do you say what? Like, all those things are things that inhibited him. But despite Washington's own fears of his own insufficiencies, his letters show no evidence of his mental powers ever fading, and they were often amazingly vigorous throughout it all. Just his own self-doubts at times talking about that. So he was ready here to talk about how he's ready to step down. He can't handle all of the stress, but Hamilton is still actively moving towards something, actively doing things, actively pursuing power. And in this song, he tries to take Washington on and say, don't step down, don't step away from power. You could continue to lead if you wanted to, or really, since I want to, I need you to keep on, because who knows who's going to succeed you. Yeah,
I really love this line here where he says, I want to give you a word of warning. And Hamilton goes, sir, I don't know what you heard, but whatever it is, Jefferson started it. Yeah, and I'm sure that always gets a laugh there with it's that sibling rivalry again, going to dad. He started it.
Yeah, I love that.
In history, Hamilton wrote a letter to Washington about Jefferson and kind of the feud going on there. I sincerely regret that you have been made to feel uneasy in your administration, though I consider myself the deeply injured party. I know that I have been an object of total opposition from Mr. Jefferson, that I have been the frequent subject of most unkind whispers by him. I have watched a party form in the legislature with the single purpose of opposing me. Basically, I know I've been causing some problems, but look what he did. He's worse.
Yeah, exactly. He's got that victim mindset that he's the one that's been injured here. I almost hear in the back of my mind Eliza in Byrne where she's saying, you. All of this is about you, Hamilton. Yeah. You're making this about you. Even your feud with Jefferson is about you being injured, about you having a personal attack against you. It's all about him. He's a little bit selfish here.
And so Washington's going to continue on, let him know that Jefferson resigned this morning, like we mentioned a second ago, playing with the timeline there. And Hamilton, you're kidding. And he just can't believe it already. He's already in shock before he even gets the big news.
Yeah, I love that kind of deadpan delivery. Like, he's been engaged and energized throughout the beginning of this conversation. Yeah. And he's just like, you're kidding. His voice drops a little bit. Lin-Manuel, when he delivers this, he's like, oh my goodness.
And he's like, Jefferson's going to pay for this. And Washington pulls out that Burr quote basically here, talk less.
Yeah, I appreciate that Washington tells him, hey, I need a favor. And immediately Hamilton's energy is back, and he's like, "Whatever you say, sir. Jefferson will pay for this behavior." He jumps immediately to attacking
he's like, "Oh, the favor's going to be to attack Jefferson. Let's do it. Let's go.
I can do this. I will use I'll use the press. I'll write under a pseudonym. You'll see what I could do to him. I'm going to take him on. I am going to attack this guy. I'm going to crush this guy who left your administration and is going to run against you. I am going to take odds with your opponent, and I'm going to do this for you." Because it's really what he wanted to do to begin with.
Right.
So yeah, I love that energy comes back. He's not really listening to what what Washington says at first. He's like, "You need to do a favor," and then Hamilton's just full speed ahead with his, "I'm going to attack him in the press." Washington, "Talk less. I need you to draft an address." And Hamilton still didn't hear. He's like, "Yes, he resigned. You can finally speak your mind." He's like, "You want to make a statement. Obviously, you want to actively attack him. I'm going to help you in this because I'm going to put words in your mouth. You're going to throw fire at this guy."
I actually like, and I don't know if it was purposeful on Lin-Manuel Miranda's part, although he's a genius. We can just assume everything is purposeful with him. But Washington doesn't say "smile more." He leaves that part out. And I think it might have something to do with, the history. There's that big rumor that Washington had wooden teeth. That's not true. But Washington did have dental problems. His teeth bothered him a lot. He actually had teeth made of hippopotamus ivory, brass screws, lead, and gold metal wire. And it's rumored that he might have had a set of dentures made out of human teeth.
Yeah, apparently,
Gross.
Bought certain teeth off of his slaves at times, which is a really uncomfortable position. But he... I saw a National Geographic documentary on Washington's life, and they read into a lot about Washington's dentures and his teeth and the wooden, the different things he used to compose these teeth, and how the loss of his teeth actually changed his face somewhat. So he may not have smiled much because of that. But there's also just the idea that Washington, we often glorify him as this heroic, untouchable, mythical character in the American pantheon, right. But he also led one of the most successful and useful spy networks during the Revolutionary War time. And he was often an expert in misinformation and sending false messages along certain wires and figuring out what was going to happen through his own spies. And so he had a spy side of him where he would, sometimes he would actually tell a lie, contrary to the myth of him never being able to tell a lie. He used secrecy to advance some of his own causes. And so there was an ambitious side of Washington that I think actually we do a disservice to him not ever talking about that side of him, because he looks like this flat, boring character in American history. Yeah. But he is not boring at all. If you're interested in getting into the excitement of who Washington is, Ron Chernow wrote the Washington A Life biography that is beautiful, about going into his younger days as an ambitious soldier and then rising up to power, and how he sought power in Virginia for a while, and then eventually, you get the reputation of him being this reluctant leader who eventually shows up at the Constitutional Convention and reluctantly accepts the role of president and the role of leading the army and all these areas there. But he was an incredibly interesting person. So him saying "talk less," he would not have said "smile more" necessarily, but he did say lies with a grin on his face, with not having any of his conscience violated at times doing that. But since it's so important historically, I like that side conversation about his smiling and his teeth. It's just interesting, whether it's important or not to the musical. It's interesting to me. Every little detail of the history that we can get into is just fun.
And Robbie already mentioned here in the lyrics, but Hamilton says, "I'll write under a pseudonym. You'll see what I can do to him." And Robbie actually mentioned that in the last song too, that they did go back and forth in these pamphlets. And it was actually a month after the farewell address was published that Hamilton actually made good on this specific promise and attacked Jefferson. And in that pamphlet, he accused Jefferson of having an affair with one of his slaves, which we know, as we've discussed before, that was most likely true.
Yeah, so it was not so overt. It wasn't a really blatant accusation. It was kind of a subtle hint about people having relationships with their black property. Their slaves were being addressed here. And it was not blatant enough that anyone reading the pamphlet could read it and say, "Oh, Hamilton's saying that Jefferson is sleeping with Sally Hemings and having kids by her."
Right.
But it was at least blatant enough that any Jeffersonian could look at it and say, "Oh, Hamilton knows. Hamilton's aware of these rumors. Hamilton knows enough about this that he could go public if we started attacking him more aggressively." So it's almost like that tit for tat, the quid pro quo of him saying, "I am not going to bring up Sally Hemings if you don't bring up Maria Reynolds." And so they both have dirt on each other that Jefferson had kind of hinted about knowing about Maria and his own actual sexual escapades. And so there was this, I know what you know what I know. We're going to just let each other know, but we're not going to talk about it yet.
Right. And so Washington says he's stepping down so he can run for president. And we've already mentioned that really he was stepping down, at least publicly. He was saying to kind of retire to Monticello. And people who knew him in private kind of knew that it was clear that he was resigning out of frustration with Hamilton's influence and a belief that he could maybe better influence things outside of the cabinet.
Yeah, that's true. He also understood that there was no presidential possibility early on. And so he was willing to accept the nomination eventually to be John Adams' vice president, but he wasn't thinking that he could actually surpass George Washington. He thought that Washington is so much of an untouchable character. He's the indispensable man in history, and John Adams is, by many people's standards, the heir apparent to the presidency. The one who should inherit that. And so he wasn't going to look politically ambitious for a little while. He was kind of doing the Aaron Burr, lying in wait for a while until his moment to jump on board.
Well, and he's not the only one who thinks that way. Hamilton thinks that way. Good luck defeating you, sir.
Right.
And I mean, it's true. He probably couldn't defeat Washington, but unfortunately, Washington's stepping down. I'm not running for president. Hamilton, complete shock. I'm sorry. What?
Yes, so he was shocked originally when Jefferson was stepping down, but then he immediately turned on the steam engine, full speed ahead. He was so excited. He was opening his mouth and inserting his foot, saying all of these things, and then this stops him. He's like, I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Full speed,
the music
full
even stops, and there's no singing here. It just all drops. I'm sorry, what? Complete shock.
Yeah, this is a huge revelation. No one in the country really expected him to step aside and lose power. Like, they were used to monarchs. They were used to people who would have that power and hold it until they died.
Even other similar revolutions like this ended with another monarch rising up. It wasn't like a democratic system rising up, or even if it was, it ended with that monarchy. And if Washington had just stayed around, the United States might have been very different.
That's true. One of the things that I've heard said about the Adams administration is how you don't see as much done in the Adams administration as you see in the Washington administration and in the Jefferson administration. You see some really important things, absolutely, and we'll talk about that in the next episode. But one of the most important legacies that John Adams had was you see the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to the next, where you see them handing off the reins. And Washington sets the precedent for the president serving 2 terms, and it is monumental.
Right. He's going to say here, we'll teach him how to say goodbye. And that's what he does to the country. He teaches them kind of how the presidency should go. We've touched on it before, but this was kind of taken as the way the presidency should be handled in 2 terms. And up until the 1940s, it was possible to get a 3rd term. Some even tried, but it didn't really happen ever until FDR, who actually got elected for 4 terms. He didn't end up finishing his 4th one, but then there was a constitutional amendment added. They were like, all right, we got to make sure that doesn't happen again. And they made it to where there's just 2 terms as a law now. You can't actually go past that anymore. And I haven't done a lot of research on how FDR ended up getting that 3rd and then even that 4th term, but I think it had a lot to do with, we were in World War then, and World War II was, going strong, and there wasn't time to be voting for presidents. We were very focused on another thing going on in the world. So we're like, we'll just keep him in. Let's keep going with that. So
yeah, we don't usually like changing who's in charge in the middle of a conflict as large as that. Here in this stanza as well, you see the tie-in to what we were talking about with Take a Break, where Washington looks at Hamilton and says, relax, have a drink with me one last time.
I like that he tells him relax. He's like, I know you're in shock. Relax, have a drink.
Yeah, exactly. And he just can't understand. He says, no, sir. Why would you want to teach him to say goodbye to you? Why?
Yeah. And Washington's just moving on, telling him about the things he wants to talk about in this farewell speech. I want to talk about neutrality.
Which brings up in Hamilton's mind the feud between Britain and France and how they're on the verge of war. And he's like, well, I'm going to grab that nugget and say, well, is this the best time for you to transition?
Yeah.
And
I like that he's in shock, and he might hear what he's saying there, but he's not like taking it as, oh, these are the things I want to talk about, rewriting this down. He's like, oh, I'm going to go back. You still don't need to be stepping down. I'm still stuck on this first point you made.
Yeah. And then the next point brings up the same type of a thing where it says, I want to warn against partisan fighting, and he still wants to argue with him. Washington shuts him down with, pick up a pen, start writing, which may be one of the few times when Hamilton in his life had to be told to pick up a pen to start writing.
Yeah. I like that he's still stuck up until that point. He's just wanting to argue that first point. And he's like, hey, I'm telling you something that you need to be writing down now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Hamilton was going to be the one to help him write this farewell address. But there's actually two different versions he helped him write. One was a revision of a previous draft written with the assistance of James Madison, actually.
Yeah.
And then the other one was one that Hamilton came up with his own style, which Washington ended up choosing.
Yeah, that's an interesting historical note, because starting in November 1791 and running for more than a year, James Madison actually published 18 essays attacking the Washington administration in the National Gazette. Nevertheless, on May 5th, 1792, apparently unaware of the authorship of those papers, Washington unburdened himself to Madison, talking about his political plans and how he wanted to resign and all of these ambitions that he had, how he was ready to step down. And so Madison had drafted a farewell address at the end of Washington's first term for Washington, saying, hey, here's a speech for you. At the end of his second term, Washington sent that speech to Hamilton in the mail and said, hey, Hamilton, will you look over this and give me your talking points? Tell me how you would want to revise it. Hamilton basically said, no, we're rewriting this. We're redoing this. And he rewrote it. And he did put in a lot of Federalist things that kind of argued for what was happening in the time. We can talk about the contents of that speech at the end of the song, but it is fascinating that James Madison was actively attacking the administration while Washington still trusted him and was asking him to write the first draft of his speech. It's a very interesting house of cards, so to speak.
So then Hamilton says, as far as the people are concerned, you have to serve. You could continue to serve, which, as we know, Hamilton liked the idea of the president serving a lifetime.
Yeah, at least as long as possible for Hamilton himself to advance.
Yeah.
I love that delivery there, because he's been giving these large arguments like, with Britain and war on the verge of France, is this the best time? And he had some other specific arguments, but then as far as the people are concerned, you have to serve. You could continue to serve. Like, I almost imagine that, like, him suddenly becoming timid, like, I'm at the end of my ropes. You should serve for the people's sake. But that last line, you could continue to serve. It sounds like he's helpless all of a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, Hamilton knows that it's nice to have Washington on your side. He knows that he's kind of hitched his wagon to Washington. And without Washington in the office, he's going to have a harder time of things. He knows the people that he's coming up against, and that they might be the ones coming in power next. And he's kind of scared in this moment. He's like, oh, I need you here.
Exactly. That vulnerability shows through Lin-Manuel's delivery on, you could continue to serve. That's the weakest argument he ever makes. It's not an argument. It's just a begging him to stay.
And Washington isn't having it. He comes right in, no. And one last time.
Yeah, I love that. It's just like a single word answer from his general saying, no, one last time. Yeah, he goes straight into singing his own lines again. Chris Jackson is brilliant as Washington, so noble, so refined, but very direct and chivalrous in this in his approach here. And he talks about how they will hear from me, and if we get this right, we're going to teach them how to say goodbye. We're going to teach them how to transition power peacefully, how to do this the right way. If I stay on too long, then one, my own reputation might hurt because I might live long enough to destroy my reputation, but two, I actually will show the country, and this is what he's trying to say publicly, I will show the country how to move on, the way to use this democracy to move them forward.
Right. So Hamilton is going to argue again here, Mr. President, they're going to say that you're weak. And Washington says, no, they'll see that we are strong. And he's speaking of the nation there. Hamilton's focused on him and his reputation. Washington, maybe even himself a little bit, but Washington himself is saying, we as a nation, they'll see that we're strong. When I step down and they can move on without me and see that they can be just as strong without me, they don't need me in charge and the lead of this, they'll see that us as a nation, we're strong.
Yeah, so Hamilton had used the American people to try to make his own argument for his own side. When he said, the people, as far as the people are concerned, you have to serve. Washington's actually thinking of the people, and he says that the people will be strong as a country if I can transition power peacefully and respectfully to where we can actually move them forward and not just think about the here and now, but about our children's generations.
Exactly. When Hamilton questions here, why do you have to say goodbye? Washington says, if I say goodbye, the nation learns to move on. It outlives me when I'm gone, which is the point he wants to make. He wants to make sure that the nation doesn't collapse when he dies, that they don't view him as this monarch who, when he dies, they're lost without leadership. And they want to make sure, like you mentioned, that it passes peacefully. And actually, the U.S. has the longest reign of peaceful passing of power in the world.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I like thinking about how that number is calculated, because you do have the American Civil War that kind of comes in as a big thing, but it's not actually about transfer of powers necessarily. Yeah. It's about the way the powers are behaving, but it's not about the transfer in itself. So that's an interesting statistic that I'd love to read that article later.
Yeah, I actually found on Wikipedia they have a list of all the different powers in the world and when the last time a peaceful transition happened. And they start ours here at 1800, but the next one is the UK in 1830. And after that, it jumps like way up to the 1900s. There's not a lot of peaceful transition of powers in the world. So it's a big deal to have that happen.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely one of George Washington's very important legacies that he leaves for us. He had so many things that he set up in the American traditions, but this is one of them that is very, very important.
And so he's going to start quoting scripture here. Like the scripture says, everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. I like that the music here kind of calms down. You get this gospel sound to it. The rap and the R&B drops away. And this might be a little bit of a stretch. I think Lin-Manuel Miranda might be pulling in a reference, though, from Tupac's The Song Changes, which is my favorite Tupac song.
Oh, really?
The piano here sounds very similar to that song, which actually the piano part is from The Way It Is by Bruce Hornsby. You know, it's sampled for the Tupac song, but the Tupac song has more of a connection here because that song was released after he died. That song is Tupac's legacy that he left, and it's his saying goodbye, basically. So it's really interesting connection to this song here.
I'll have to listen to that song later because I'm not remembering it as we're speaking right now. I'm sure I've heard it before.
You would specifically love that song.
I believe that so much. This actual stanza, when he starts quoting scripture and he talks about how the people will be safe in the nation we've made, and how his own personal desire is to sit under his own vine and fig tree, a moment alone in the shade at home in the nation we made. This is what he was fighting for. This is what he was establishing. He was trying to make America into a country where people could go home where their family is and be safe, be represented. And here he's giving his own heart. He's bearing his soul very vulnerably. And this is what it is that it takes Hamilton to calm down. He's accepted what's happening. He's accepted that Washington is leaving office. And Hamilton sings along with him the refrain that Washington's been singing through this whole song, one last time. And then he goes into writing the speech for George Washington.
A quick jump back to that scripture that Washington brings up there. It's actually from Micah, and it's mentioned similar ways throughout the Bible, but Washington used that phrase apparently a lot in correspondence throughout his life. We have a lot of writings where he wrote that. And one of the most famous ones was a letter to the Hebrew congregation at Newport in Rhode Island, where he used that full phrase. And he says, quote, "May the children of the stock of Abraham who dwell in the land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of the other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit in safety under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall be none to make him afraid. May the Father of all mercies scatter light and not darkness upon our paths, and make us all in our several vocations useful here, and in his own due time and way everlastingly more happy," which he was just using that shared scripture by Jews and Christians to express his hope that the Jewish people would flourish here in America. So it's kind of cool to see him talking about that way about the Jewish immigrants here in America.
Yeah, that's a really, really neat point. So in this song, you see that Hamilton is the one who's highlighting his own ambitions and is arguing for Washington to stay. Historically, Hamilton didn't really fight with Washington about stepping down. Remember, Hamilton was already out of the cabinet when that was going on. He didn't have a vested interest necessarily in Washington staying in that position politically because Hamilton had made a big enough name for himself in the Federalist Party that he hadn't needed to hitch his wagon to Washington for quite a while. But in this musical, Hamilton is embodying the complaint and the voice of so many Americans of that era. So many Americans were saying these things that Hamilton is saying. They were trying to get Washington to serve for a longer term. They were trying to get him to stay in power. They were expressing frustration and confusion. And in the next song, you'll see King George III expressed that same confusion. Like, I didn't know someone could just step down and leave their office. So the voice of Hamilton in this song is the voice of so many Americans at that point in history saying, why is he leaving? He shouldn't leave. At the same time, there were voices like those from the Republican Party that wanted the Federalist Colossus out of office. But you see here that Lin-Manuel is using Hamilton's voice in a very interesting way.
And at this point, when Hamilton comes in with that one last time, the speech is going to kind of get read through here, and Hamilton's going to just talk through as this violin comes in, and you'll notice a kind of a variation of the story of tonight in that music there. And as they go through, mostly verbatim of a few paragraphs of Washington's farewell address, Miranda actually mentions how they got this idea of having Hamilton reading and Washington singing over it. He said, "We use the text of Washington's actual address. It starts spoken and Washington begins singing. It's a straight grab from the Yes We Can video for the Obama campaign."
Oh, yeah.
Where they sing the speech under it. That's where we learned that technique. And so in this particular song, we owe a very specific debt, and really more to will.i.am, who wrote the song, than Obama, but to Obama.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of people write about this particular very important farewell address, this farewell speech that Washington delivers. And it is a very unique blending of Hamilton and Washington together, that this speech couldn't have been written by any other people to get, like, in history, to where you have the very detailed, articulate expressions that Hamilton would put into this, with the noble refinement of George Washington's tweaking of it after he actually says it. So it's like Hamilton is going in through the lyrics, and he's going to say these words, and then Washington's going to start singing them over him, adding the eloquence and the beauty to it.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting there, that Hamilton is the one who's speaking while Washington is singing. Kind of illustrates that Hamilton can make these excellent persuasive speeches and get all the right words, whereas Washington brings the heart and he brings the passion to it, and he's going to convince the people. And Chernow actually touches on this a little bit. He says, "Their two voices blend admirably together. The result was a literary miracle."
Yes, high praise for this particular political speech. This very important speech. I actually pulled up on YouTube a couple dramatic readings and deliverings of this speech. It's not a very long speech. Washington was not known for giving very long-winded speeches like Hamilton, the guy that can speak for 6 hours and make the convention listless. Washington's a guy who's much more succinct, much more to the point and direct. And so Hamilton, understanding Washington's style of delivery and his way of speaking and his way of thinking, drafts this address that's very to the point. And if you listen to one of those dramatic readings of this, it's very interesting, because the first portion of this speech historically is very, very much what you'd expect from a transitioning power. Someone who's saying, this is what the state is like right now. This is how we are established, and I have great optimism and hope for the future. And Washington, at a certain point, says specifically, I should probably stop my speech here. I should probably stop my speech at this moment, but my passion and my love for the country and my fear for what is happening in certain partisan circles, it's driving me to say a few more things. And so he goes on and lists some bullet points about what is happening in the country and what needs to be held on to for the next administration. And he talks about some points that are very Federalist. Very Hamiltonian. I
wonder who wrote this.
I wonder who did this. Yeah. And Jefferson and the Republicans would look at this, and they saw it as a very militant speech in certain ways, because Washington kind of subtly acknowledged the Whiskey Rebellion and some other things that had come up that challenged the Union and the government's power. And Washington kind of steps forward and says, look, we need a strong centralized government. We need to make sure that we have a federal system that keeps all of the states in line and keeps all of the states united together. And so he talks about neutrality, which was a huge talking point, like from the cabinet battle where you have the Federalists versus the Republicans. And he talks about partisan fighting, which is a little bit tongue-in-cheek.
Which we saw earlier in the song. He mentioned both those things.
Exactly. And he talks about how partisan fighting can destroy the country, and he doesn't want to bring anything about that will destroy the union of the states between the North and the South. And it's kind of a little bit of a jab at the Democratic Republican societies that were being formed to advance the political agenda of Jeffersonian Republicans at the time. So he has some very pointed political attacks in this speech that are very telling about where Washington stood in this. He wasn't a puppet for Hamilton. Right. He was absolutely standing up for a lot of the things that Hamilton stood up for. So I think that historically it's a beautiful speech. Look it up on YouTube, listen to a couple readings of it, or just read the address online because it's everywhere.
So the song actually goes from there to George Washington's Going Home, which harkens back to Thomas Jefferson's Coming Home. And it brings in this idea, which you kind of see in a couple of places in this song, of Southern Virginian references to the songs that Jefferson sang a few times, because he's going home to Virginia. He's a Southerner.
Yeah, he is. Even though he associates a lot with the North and he's been tied to the Federalist camp, he is a Virginian at heart, and he's a farmer at heart. He is someone who loves farming, loves the quiet life of being with his family. And we've talked before about how he was a kind of a progressive farmer, using a lot of European styles of crop rotation and blending certain things together to make it work. There's actually a documentary I saw recently about his life that talked about how his farming actually saved him in a couple of the battles in the Revolutionary Wars, farming instincts, because he could feel in the wind that there was a freeze coming overnight. And so he stopped at a certain point and put a lot of campfires ahead to make it look like his campground was preparing for battle, and that all of his troops were staying there. And he had a few people go build these huge bonfires so that the enemy would see, the British people would see them in a distance. But really what he was counting on was the frost freezing this field of mud overnight so that his troops could make an escape and get to another strategic location. And so his instincts as a farmer kind of saved him in that moment too. He was not the tactician that you would see on the British side of things, but he was very much the farmer, and he wanted to return to that life. He wanted to go back and get his hands dirty again with what's happening on his plantation and doing retirement.
Right. And that idea of him returning back to his farm is something that his contemporaries used to mythologize him here. They drew parallels with the legendary Roman figure named Cincinnatus, who left his farm in the middle of plowing the field to become a dictator to lead the Romans to victory before giving up absolute power to go back to farming. And actually, random side note, Cincinnatus, it's actually where we get the name Cincinnati here in the States. But that's a weird tangent that kind of had a couple of weird twists and turns to lead it to that point. So not going into it at the moment.
Yeah.
Look it up. It's interesting.
Right. I love the refrains coming in here where you have history has its eyes on you. It's like he understands now that this is the end of his story. He's retiring now. History has been looking back on what he has done, and he hopes in the text of this song and in the text of the speech that history will view his mistakes with indulgence, and that it will look back on him graciously with understanding his heart and where he desired the American people to be.
Exactly. And some historians suggest that the reason he stepped down was because he knew history had its eyes on him and he wanted to set that precedent. But in the staging here, he looks out toward the audience and he kind of waves at the audience saying, hey, everyone listening to this, everyone out there, people of the United States and everyone in the world, history has its eyes on you. Keep that in mind. It's almost Lin-Manuel Miranda's message to everybody. Remember that history has its eyes on you. Do something great with your life.
Yeah, this is Washington actually talking about what he has learned, the hard-won wisdom he has earned, like we saw earlier in the song, where he is sharing the wisdom that has come with his age, with his experiences. He says, I've learned that history is going to watch you. History has its eyes on you. I've learned that it matters how you behave. It matters how you act politically. It matters what you stand for and what you fight for. And he is passing along to the American people his wisdom. And it's like the founding father of America passing along to his children his advice, his wisdom. Like, this is what I want you to remember about me. This is what I want you to learn as you strike forward to make your own legacy and to pursue your own heart. And so it's almost like a father-son relationship again between Hamilton and Washington, where Washington's looking at Hamilton's giving this advice, but he's also looking at the American people through the whole address, saying, remember to learn from what I've been through.
Right. So this takes us to our last song we're covering here. We're going to just kind of touch on this one because it's also going to lead into our next episode. And I love this transition here where Washington is walking off the stage. He turns to go off stage, and King George here comes up on stage and kind of stares at him in bewilderment. They get like face to face with each other as they're walking off stage, or as Washington's walking off stage, and he just stares in bewilderment, like watching him walk off stage. Like, how are you leaving? Almost like, how are you leaving the stage? But how are you leaving the presidency?
Yeah, it's one George looking at another George incredulously, just completely perplexed, as he says, saying that I wasn't even aware that someone could step away from power like that.
Yeah. While it's a funny line there that always gets a laugh, I wasn't aware that's something a person could do. King George was kind of aware. He actually drafted a letter almost resigning his kingship after the War of Independence, and he was actually persuaded to remain on the throne. We don't have a lot of time to get into that fully there.
Right. He definitely took the American Revolution and American independence very personally.
And he asked that question, are they going to keep on replacing whoever's in charge? Which, in response to the question, what is most important of this grand experiment in the United States, George Washington said, not the election of the first president, but the election of the second president, the peaceful transition of power, like we mentioned.
Right.
And then he says, there's nobody else in the country who looms quite as large. And when he says country. King George puts up air quotes and rolls his eyes. Country. He doesn't really see the United States as their own nation still.
Right. He definitely doesn't respect it.
And then the other person comes on the stage and whispers into his ear when he's asking, like, who is this person? And he just stops and he goes, John Adams! I love that.
I love your shock as you said that. It's funny.
He's just completely bewildered by it, which is going to take us into our next episode.
Yeah, so John Adams is that little guy that spoke to him all those years ago as an English ambassador to the king. And that's a fascinating transition of power. It's a way to bring up a character in this musical that isn't a huge character, but in history is a very, very important person.
Right.
So that's why next episode we've dedicated the whole thing to the John Adams administration. It's a short song in the musical, The Adams Administration, but we're going to flesh it out by talking through the HBO miniseries on the John Adams life. And so if you're interested in watching those, they're on Amazon Prime or HBO Now or HBO Go. Grab a friend, watch these, maybe tweet about it to us and let us know your thoughts. And it's going to be really, really exciting. I've been loving the episodes I've been watching about John Adams because I frankly didn't know a lot about him. I've read a little bit from the David McCullough biography that the series is based on, but I haven't been able to dissect it as much as the Ron Chernow biographies on Hamilton, Washington, and a couple of the others we've been reading for this podcast. But yeah, I'm super happy about it.
Yeah. So until our next episode, you can email us, contact@graphocast.com. Check out the website, graphocast.com. You can leave some comments there on the episodes. And if you'd like to get in contact with us personally, I'm at FleshEater on Twitter.
And I'm at Alpha Knight.
So until next time, see you in the Adams Administration.
Da 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 da. Da, 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 da.
Da, 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 da.
John Adams, good luck.
Hi, Vinton Bayne here again for a real quick announcement. The Graphomania Podcast Network has a new podcast, Read Brave Comics, a comics podcast where your hosts, Corey Casto and I, will introduce you to a wide variety of segments about the world of comic books, some of which will include segments by me and Robbie from this very Hamilton podcast. Check it out now on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or at graphocast.com, graphocast.com. That's Read Brave Comics.